And if you're not careful, the enemy will play on your wounds and you'll develop a wounded spirit. When God's trying to make you the victor, you'll live in a place of the victim. I don't know about you, but I'm not walking in my life as a victim. Saul has to deal with wounds. He has to deal with being wounded. How many of you know life has a way of wounding you, huh? Not necessarily because you're doing something to somebody. You could be minding your own business and still wounded. You could be smiling and dressed up for church and still wounded. You can shout and still won't go to work and still be wounded, because life has a way of wounding you. This one is so interesting because Saul is fighting the enemy and he is wounded. He is fighting the enemy and he is wounded. He is still alive and he is wounded. He is wounded, but he's still working. He's wounded, but he's still functioning. He's wounded, but he wonders if anybody sees his woundedness. How many of you know that people will miss you being wounded for what they want? Help me, Lord. How many of you know that people can want something from you and they'll see you wounded and still ask you for what they want, even though they see they wounded, because their wants is bigger than your wounds? And if you're not careful, you'll give everybody what they want and you will not tend to your wounds. You'll give everybody what they want and you'll miss tending to your wounds. This wounds, anytime you're wounded, it's an alert. It's for God to get your attention. It's not for you to overlook it or for you to bypass it. A wound is where healing happens. A wound is for you to acknowledge, you to say, hey, I'm wounded here. Somebody help me. Hey, I'm bleeding here. Someone help me. Hey, I'm hurting here. Someone help me. And so many times, too many people have too much pride that they will not acknowledge when they're wounded because they don't want to look weak, huh? Where the honest people at and say, I'll hide my wounds before I let you think that I'm weak. People will hide their wounds so you don't take their wound as a weakness. And they'll keep taking from you what they want even though you're wounded. And they'll keep taking from you what you want even though they're wounded. But wounding, a wounded place is a place where healing can happen. You see, and whatever you have to do, you have to tend to the wounds quickly. You have to tend to the wounds quickly, because if you don't, you'll develop a wounded spirit. See, it's one thing to have a wound and then you acknowledge the wound, you get the wound fixed, and then somebody point to it and say, what's that? And it's a scar. You say, oh, that's a scar. It don't hurt no more. Let me tell you a story. You can tell a story about it, right? You can point to it, you can share it, and you can keep moving because you tended to the wound. But if you're walking around with a Band-Aid on, that's a scar, that's a wound that's been attended to. If you're walking around bleeding, then you haven't attended to it. And now, if you're not careful, you'll have a wounded spirit. You'll think everybody that's trying to meet you, trying to hurt you, and everybody that's around you want to take something from you, and everybody don't like you. Just because one person didn't like you, you start thinking everybody don't like you. Then you started walking into the room instead of saying, hey, I'm the best thing since sliced bread, everybody love me. You'll start walking in the room saying, they don't like me, they don't need me. And if you're not careful, the enemy will play on your wounds and you'll develop a wounded spirit. When God's trying to make you the victor, you'll live in a place of the victim. I don't know about you, but I'm not walking in my life as a victim.